They gave my favorite chair to the cat, the one by the window, where I watched the world and waited for their visits. I said nothing. But I was never just looking out. I was watching everything. That chair wasn't just furniture. It was mine. My spot. My warmth in the afternoon sun. My place to think, to remember, to listen when they thought I couldn't hear. They moved it without asking. Said the cat liked the view. Said I could stretch out more in the back room, where the light never touched the floor and the vents clicked all night like a warning. They laughed while they rearranged my life pillows, pictures, prescriptions. Called it reorganizing. Called me easygoing. And I let them think I was. I let them believe I'd softened so much I couldn't feel the corners they were cutting. I heard them joke with their friends on speakerphone. She's harmless. She just sits all day. And maybe I did. But sitting isn't the same as sleeping. I sat still because I was listening. I sat because I'd earned the right to take up space in the home I helped pay for, in the family I helped raise. But they didn't see me anymore. Just a figure to shuffle around. A voice to speak over. A hand that forgot where it once signed. But I hadn't forgotten. I watched them skim through mail meant for me. Watched my name appear on papers they whispered about but never brought to the table. I saw them glance at my purse when they thought I wasn't looking. I heard the word estate before anyone said I was even close to leaving. So I sat, still, silent, taking notes in my head, letting them arrange the room however they pleased, letting them believe I was fading into fabric, letting them underestimate the woman who built this family from casseroles and overtime. They thought the chair was empty. They were wrong. I was watching, and I was waiting. I waited by that window, not just in old age. Long before my hair turned white and my bones learned to ache in the cold, I waited by that window when I was young, tired, and holding babies on my chest. I nursed them there, held bottles steady with one hand and held my breath with the other, praying they'd sleep just 10 more minutes. I waited for laundry to finish, for soup to simmer, for the school bus to turn the corner. That window faced the street, but it also faced my life. I used to fold clothes in that chair, little socks that never stayed paired, shirts with grass stains and juice spills. I remember smoothing each piece with my hands, thinking maybe if I kept everything in order, life wouldn't fall apart. It was where I rocked them through fevers and bad dreams, where I sat after the phone rang late and brought news no mother wants, where I stared out, not really seeing the trees or the mailman or the neighborhood kids on their bikes, but thinking of the things I couldn't say. That window knew my worry. That chair held my weight when the rest of the world asked me to carry it all. I waited by that window during storms. Real ones, rain slamming sideways, branches tapping like questions I couldn't answer. And the quiet ones, too long silences in the house after an argument, or the dull weight of disappointment when a birthday passed without a single thank you. That chair wasn't just a seat. It was a witness. When my husband died, I sat there with the funeral pamphlet in my lap and tried to remember how to breathe. I looked out that window and whispered his name into the sunlight. I didn't cry much in front of anyone. But that chair saw the whole flood. I waited there for the first morning when it didn't hurt as much. For the day the mail didn't come with bills I couldn't bear to open. For the nights I could sleep without waking up and reaching for someone who wasn't there. I waited by that window when the kids were late. When they called and said, "We'll stop by." And I set out tea and cookies that went untouched. I never scolded. I never demanded. I just sat there, watching the cars go by, hoping one would pull into the driveway. Sometimes they did. Most times, they didn't. Still, I waited. That chair held my hopes, my heartbreak, my healing. I imagined I'd grow old there gracefully, that it would be my soft landing, a spot that felt like a reward after decades of holding everything together. A place where my presence still mattered even if I didn't speak much. I thought maybe one day I'd hold a grandchild in my lap and tell stories about how things used to be, how the wallpaper had changed, but not the love in the walls. But it didn't happen like that. One day, without asking, they moved the chair, pushed it aside like it was just another thing in the way, said the cat liked the view, said the chair was worn, not good for my back, offered me a recliner with thick cushions and no view. It faced a wall, and no one asked if I wanted it. They acted like I'd been moved for my comfort. But comfort doesn't come from cushions. It comes from history, from memory, from meaning. They called it just a chair. But to me, it was the only place left in that house that hadn't changed. Everything else had gone: the rug I picked with my husband, the photos that once sat on the mantel, the lace curtains I'd hemmed by hand. But the chair remained. Same spot, same angle, same creak in the arm when I shifted my weight, until it didn't. And that was the day I realized something. They weren't waiting for me anymore. Not to speak, not to guide, not to stay. They had moved on, but I hadn't left. I waited by that window for so long, through childhood colds, teenage tantrums, military deployments, pregnancies, promotions, divorces. Through decades of sacrifice that never asked for applause, just respect. That chair was where I earned the right to be seen, to take up space, to simply be. And in one casual decision, they erased it. Not cruelly, not with malice. That's the part that stings the most: how easily it happened. How small they made something so big. How quickly a life of presence turned into an afterthought. I didn't fight them. I didn't raise my voice. But I stopped waiting because the woman who waited by that window, she's still here. She remembers everything she gave, everything she endured, and now she remembers who she is without needing their permission. They took the chair, but they didn't take what it stood for. And they didn't notice the woman who stood up. The curtains were drawn more often. So were they. It started subtly, the way seasons shift. One day, the sunlight was just a little dimmer through the fabric. Not because the weather changed, but because someone started keeping the curtains closed. Said it protected the furniture. Said it kept the room cooler. But I'd sat by that window long enough to know it wasn't about the sun. It was about not seeing, not being seen. Visits grew shorter. At first, they came late and left early. Then they stopped knocking altogether, just walked in, talking on the phone, distracted, moving past me like I was part of the wallpaper. I tried to keep the conversations going, but I noticed how often they interrupted now, finished my sentences for me, corrected me when I was already right, smiled tight when I told old stories, the kind they used to love. I told myself they were busy, that life moves faster now. But I also noticed how their busyness only ever seemed to grow when it came to me. They started talking in clipped sentences in the kitchen. She doesn't need all this space. It's too much upkeep for her. Eventually, we'll have to talk about selling. Eventually. That word lingered like a cobweb in the corner. But cobwebs don't spin themselves overnight. They take time. They build quietly while no one looks up. Then eventually came faster than I expected. They began to clean out drawers that weren't theirs. Just decluttering, they said. I found boxes in the garage labeled "Mom's Stuff," written in someone else's handwriting. I didn't remember agreeing to give any of it away. But there it was, taped shut like a decision had already been made. One day I went to reach for a bill and couldn't find it. They'd started forwarding my mail to Make Things Easier. My name wasn't on the new envelope, just theirs. I asked about the electricity account. I'd always paid it. They said they'd taken care of it. I asked what that meant. They changed the subject. They began to speak about me in the third person even while I was in the room. She's doing fine. She just forgets sometimes. She's not as steady on her feet as she used to be. My legs were fine. My memory, too. I remembered everything, especially the way they used to sit in my lap and ask for one more bedtime story. Now they spoke around me, over me, never to me. One day, my daughter-in-law brought home a folder. Just a few documents we might need in the future, she said. Future meant things I wasn't being told. I caught a glimpse of the page before she tucked it away. Something about ownership, about transfer. My name wasn't there. I asked about it. She smiled and said, "Oh, it's nothing. Just contingency talk." Contingency. I'd heard that word before. It's what people say when they're planning for something to end. I went to my room that night and looked through my drawer, the one where I kept copies of everything. Deeds, bills, letters from the bank. I lined them up in rows on the bed, and I noticed something. Papers had gone missing. A tax form here. An insurance letter there. Nothing big enough to notice on its own, but missing all the same. I didn't accuse them. I asked questions. They answered with patience, too much of it. The kind that sounds rehearsed. The kind that sounds like someone handling a child. They said, "Don't worry, we've got it all under control." But I wasn't worried. I was watching. They said, "You don't need to worry about the house. It's already in the family." But I never agreed to give it. They said, "We'll make sure you're taken care of." But I never asked them to. They said, "This way, you won't have to deal with the hassle." But they never asked what I wanted. The light through the window shifted. Less warm, less full. I sat in my chair, the one they hadn't moved yet, and looked out at the yard I used to tend with my bare hands. The fence needed mending. The roses had thinned. I wondered how long it had been since anyone else had even noticed. And then I noticed the biggest change of all: my name. Missing. On papers. On envelopes. On accounts I once opened with my husband, when our kids were still small enough to fit on our laps. I didn't panic. I didn't speak. I just sat with the knowledge like a seed in my palm. Small shifts in the light. That's how you know a storm's coming. Not with thunder, but with quiet, cold shade. And the curtains stayed drawn. The window faced a brick wall now. I didn't ask where the chair went. They said it was a better place. More care, more safety, more attention. A room with soft lighting and quiet floors where the staff smiled too much and spoke too slowly, like I might break from the weight of a regular sentence. The kind of place where the air smells faintly of lemon cleaner and forgetfulness. They called it a transition. I knew it was a removal. There was no warning, no family meeting, no chance to pack my memories, no goodbye to the rose bush or the drawer full of photo albums. Just a ride in a car I didn't recognize, with my name misspelled on a clipboard and my past packed into a single duffel bag. I was signed out of my own life like I was overdue for return. They'd sold the house. That much became clear when I tried to call the landline and got a sharp tone and silence. The furniture gone. The mail rerouted. My banking information updated for convenience. They said it was too much for me to handle, that I'd be happier somewhere peaceful. Peaceful? The walls here were beige. The art was nailed down. The nurses touched my hand like I was already halfway gone. They treated me gently, like someone who'd misplaced herself. But I hadn't. I was still here. Underneath the compression socks and scheduled medications, behind the afternoon puzzle sessions and lukewarm tea, I was still sharp, still aware, still quietly furious. I heard the staff whisper about me. "She seems fine mentally. Her family said she gets confused. Just keep an eye on her." They didn't say I was lying, just that I was mistaken. That's the difference when they want you to disappear with grace instead of noise. I asked for my documents. They said, "Everything's been taken care of." I asked for my own mail. They said it was being handled. I asked to call my attorney. They smiled like I'd asked to ride a unicorn. I was not confused. I was erased, one form at a time. They signed me out of ownership, out of bills, out of decision-making. They called it protection, said I needed support, said I should focus on rest and recovery. But there was nothing to recover from except the quiet horror of being made invisible. The worst part wasn't the insult, it was the certainty. They were so sure I wouldn't notice, so confident I'd go along, sedated by lavender pillows and bingo nights. They assumed the silence meant surrender, but my silence had always been strategy. The day I noticed the mail had stopped coming in my name, I didn't cry. I just began to remember things. Dates, numbers, passwords. They thought I'd forgotten. I kept them in my head like I once kept birthdays and doctor appointments. I sharpened them like a blade. I didn't ask again about the chair. I knew it was gone. Probably donated. Or worse, kept by someone who never once sat in it to rock a child to sleep or cry into the soft arm when the lights were low. They signed me out of the house, but they didn't take the memory of how the kitchen smelled when I made soup. They signed me off the deed, but they didn't erase the nights I worked late to make the mortgage. They transferred every legal line they could, but they didn't account for the woman who once handled everything without a signature to her name. I waited, just like I always had. I watched the brick wall outside the new window. Flat, brown, unmoving. Nothing came or went. No sunlight, no tree branches waving hello. Just the reminder. They had taken the view and left me with the back of something solid and unfeeling. Fine. Let them think the view no longer mattered. Let them believe I was where they placed me. Let them whisper about decline. Let them count on my stillness. Because while they signed my name away in ink, I was writing it back in memory. In full, I was not done. Not buried. Not broken. Not the fool they thought they'd filed away. They signed me out of my own life. But they didn't read the fine print. I was still the author. I sat still so they'd think I was powerless. That's how you win a chess game, by making them forget the queen. Furniture cleared. My chair was gone. The kitchen I'd cooked in for 40 years, repainted in a shade that didn't know me. I saw the photos online, the real estate listing, the fancy new fixtures, the caption that said, "Modern charm with a rich history." I was the history. But they hadn't read the paperwork closely enough. They forged some of the documents. Sloppy. Just enough to pass a quick glance, not enough to stand in court. They left dates mismatched. Witnesses who hadn't been present. They assumed no one would question them, least of all me. But I did. Not with fists or threats. With paper. With the patience they mistook for passivity. The lawyer helped file a motion to review the sale. I signed it in steady ink, my handwriting slow but deliberate. We presented records, verified phone logs, timestamps, digital inconsistencies. Every forged line like a crack in the wall they built to shut me out. The best part? The land. See, years ago, before my husband passed, we split the property title. The house was in both our names. But the soil, the land deed that had always been mine, transferred to me when my father passed. I hadn't thought about it in decades. But it was still there. Quiet, legal, untouched, and entirely separate. They sold the house, but not the ground it stood on. And when the new buyers tried to secure full ownership, the title flagged. A small red note. Land title requires separate clearance. That's when the real storm hit. The buyers called. Confused. Angry. We were told this was a clean sale. I said, it wasn't. They said, can we speak to the family? I said, you just did. Turns out, when you buy a house that stands on someone else's land, you don't get to change the locks. You get to answer questions. Legal ones. The buyers sued? Not me. Them. My children. The ones who moved me into a better place. The ones who said I didn't need to worry. The ones who smiled while signing my life away. Now they were defendants in a case I never had to shout about. I sat in court just once. In the back. Quiet. Dressed in soft gray with my notebook on my lap. I didn't testify. I didn't need to. The documents spoke for me. The judge glanced at me only once, a quick nod of recognition. Not pity, recognition. Their lawyer argued stress. Miscommunication. The judge asked if I'd been declared mentally unfit. The answer was no. The doctor's evaluation was clear. Cognitively intact. Fully aware. More than capable of managing my affairs. Their defense cracked like ice in warm water. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just watched. When the judgment came through, it wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. But it was everything. The land was mine. The sale was invalid without my consent. Damages were owed. And more importantly, the record was corrected. My name restored. My role acknowledged. My silence redefined not as weakness, but as strength the court now respected. They thought they'd written me out, but I rewrote the ending. Not with bitterness, with boundaries. Legal, permanent, and clean. Afterward, I went home, not to the house, but to the quiet little apartment I'd chosen on my own. I made tea, looked out the window, and smiled for the first time in months. They'd taken everything they could reach, but they forgot to look at what ran deeper. They signed the sale, but I still owned the soil beneath it, and that was where I planted my legacy. They took my view, so I took theirs to the estate. No doors slammed, no voices raised, no tearful confrontations, just a pen, a witness, and a signature that turned everything upside down without making a sound. That's the thing about paper. It holds power better than any voice ever could. They thought I'd live and die by sentiment, but I'd always trusted documents more than dinner table promises. The chair was gone. The house was gone. The bricks and curtains and photo frames I once dusted every Saturday now belonged to someone else. They stripped my name off of everything they could touch, utilities, titles, even the mailbox. But they never reached the only place that truly mattered. My will. It had been sitting in a drawer for years. I wrote it before the lies started, back when I still believed in unconditional love. Back when I still thought sacrifice earned something more permanent than pity. It left everything to them, fairly, lovingly, with little notes attached to each bequest. For the baby's college, to help with the mortgage, for your wedding fund. I opened it again after the ruling, after the court confirmed the fraud, after I sat across from a judge and watched my children's faces stretch and twitch in a room they never expected me to walk into, let alone win in. I didn't feel angry. I felt clean. I called the lawyer's son, the one who helped me file the injunction. We met again at the apartment, at a table smaller than the one I once hosted Thanksgivings around. He brought coffee. I brought the new draft. We went line by line. I sit in silence, not because I'm waiting, but because I found something worth listening to in the stillness. Me. They say time heals. Maybe. But space reveals. I don't hate them. That's what they'll never understand. I simply have no room left for people who only come close when they're losing something. I spent decades giving. I will not spend the rest of my life explaining why I stopped. They sent flowers. I sent the envelope back empty, because there is nothing left to say, and everything left to live. I don't need a chair by the window anymore. I became the view. There was a time I thought that seat was everything. The soft curve of the backrest, the worn cushion molded to me, the patch of sunlight that crept in just right around 9 each morning. I thought losing it meant losing myself. I thought being moved meant I was finished. But I was wrong. The chair wasn't my throne. I was. When I found my little place, nothing fancy, just 3 rooms and a window that faces east, I felt something shift. Not a grand transformation, just a quiet rearrangement inside. I walked the rooms with my bare feet on scuffed wooden floors and felt the kind of peace that doesn't ask for decoration. I didn't bring much. A box of clothes. A teapot. One photo, me and the kids when they still reached for my hand instead of my signature. Everything else, I chose fresh. Second-hand plates with little blue flowers on the rim. A lamp with a crooked shade. I straightened myself. A bookshelf from a yard sale, now full of dog-eared paperbacks. The best parts weren't new. They were mine. I hung my keys by the door, not because anyone would be stopping by, but because it made the space feel settled, secure. I made breakfast just for me. Ate slowly. Didn't clean the plate if I didn't feel like it. I let the tea steep too long, the way I actually prefer it. I started painting again. Just little things. Tulips in jam jars. A robin perched on a fence. Nothing anyone would buy, but enough to hang on my own walls. I painted with the light on my back, my hair tied up, no one watching, no one judging. The brush moved like it remembered my hands even when I didn't. And I started talking to myself again. Not out loud, just kindly. I said things like, "You did good," and "You survived that," and "You get to rest now." I didn't revisit the past. I outgrew it. The same way you outgrow a coat that kept you warm, but no longer fits the life you live now. I stopped checking old mail. I stopped rereading the will. I stopped waiting for the phone to ring from voices I'd already released. What I found wasn't revenge. It was relief. There's a robin that visits my windowsill every morning now, perches there like it owns the place. It pecks once, then looks at me like it knows. Like it sees the whole story in my face and doesn't need to ask a thing. Sometimes I wave. Sometimes I just sip my tea and let the moment pass. I don't count days anymore. I don't count people either. Love isn't a number. It's a choice. And now, I choose myself. I no longer need to prove what I've given. I no longer mourn what wasn't returned. Peace isn't passive. It's powerful. It's saying, that was enough, and meaning it. I used to think the world got smaller with age, that you lost more than you kept. But I found space in this stillness, space for music, for morning breezes, for watching the steam rise from my cup and knowing it means I'm still here. I don't need an audience. I don't need a thank you. I don't need that chair. Because I've built a life that doesn't center around being needed, it centers around being. They took the seat. They closed the curtain. They boxed up the reminders of who I was. But they forgot something important. I was never sitting still. I was always growing roots. And now I bloom in the quiet. That chair wasn't my throne. I was. And I don't need a chair by the window anymore. I became the view. Some of us were thrown from the table. We built our own and left the door open. It started with a late-night message board, the kind with soft backgrounds and small print, where usernames meant safety and silence wasn't mistaken for weakness. I didn't post at first, just read. Women my age, some older, asking questions I already knew the answers to. Is it legal if my name isn't on the deed? Can they move me without my consent? What does durable power of attorney really mean? At first, I hovered. Not out of fear, out of habit. I'd spent so long keeping my knowledge folded and quiet. Speaking up didn't come easy. But one night, a woman named Quiet Quilt 3 posted a line that reached through the screen and sat right beside me. My daughter says I should just sign. I want to trust her. But something doesn't feel right. That was the one. I typed slowly, carefully, like laying a tablecloth over a table I'd built myself. You don't have to be loud to say no, I wrote. You don't owe anyone blind trust. You owe yourself understanding. I clicked send, then waited. But something shifted in me like the first time I said no out loud to someone who once counted on my silence. Replies came. Quiet Quilt 3 thanked me. So did others. A handful turned into a group, then a rhythm. I found myself logging in each evening, not to teach, but to share. I told them, ask for copies. Keep your own folder. Don't give away what you built without reading the fine print. Being generous doesn't mean being erased. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was something stronger, clear. I wasn't writing legal advice. I was writing a map. Not every woman followed it the same way, but they all needed to know they could leave the forest if they wanted to. We didn't share photos. We didn't cry in capital letters. We told the truth in lowercase. Some typed from shared bedrooms, others from nursing homes with strong Wi-Fi and weak walls. One woman confessed she typed under a blanket so her children wouldn't know. I'm not trying to start a war, she wrote. I replied, you're trying to stay whole. That's not war. That's wisdom. We never called it a movement. We just moved slowly, together. Like rivers, like roots. They thought we were alone. We were never alone. We were waiting to find each other. Sometimes, a new woman would join and say, I thought I was the only one. We'd say, we thought that too. I sent a few books anonymously, paid for consultations I never mentioned, gave without names attached. Not because I was hiding, because I wanted them to keep the spotlight for themselves. We didn't march. We didn't demand. We did something better. We equipped. We left digital breadcrumbs for the women still waking up. We let them know that silence doesn't mean surrender, that grace doesn't mean giving it all away. And in all of it, I found something unexpected, connection. Not the kind that comes with holiday cards or birthday calls. The kind that says, I see you, without needing to meet. We didn't fix everything, but we made each other feel less broken, less blamed, less behind. Some of us were thrown from the table, so we built our own and left the door open. Now, sometimes I look around my little apartment at the books stacked by the window, at the chair that creaks with memory, at the quiet that once stung and now soothes, and I think, maybe this was the point all along. Not to win, but to withstand, to speak without shouting, to teach without preaching, to gather without noise. You don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to tell the truth and let it echo. Absolutely, Nabil. Here is the final chapter of your Granny's Truth script. Underscore 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 1 1 1. The legacy. I left the window open for someone like me. Approximately 950 words. Tone, quiet, triumph, lasting peace. They took the chair. I left the whole house, but only to those who knew its worth. I didn't need statues. Didn't want portraits. There's a kind of legacy that doesn't wear a plaque. It lives inside other people's safety. They're second chances. They're quiet sighs of relief when help arrives with no strings attached. I set it up a year before I passed. Quietly, of course. I'd had enough noise for one lifetime. My lawyer helped me create the fund, a slow, steady trust set aside for women over 60 facing the kind of betrayal no one ever warns us about. Financial abuse, legal manipulation, sweet deals that end with no home, no name, no rights. The fund had no ceremony, just monthly disbursements and soft letters that began, "You are not alone." The rest of the estate, what they thought would become theirs, didn't vanish. It just changed course. Scholarships, housing grants, legal defense support. I divided it like I used to divide dinners equally, carefully, and with love. Ava got the paintings I never hung. Ruth's daughter received the small wooden box with my rings and recipes. To a nurse named Lillian, who once sat with me for an extra 10 minutes on a hard day, I left a note that said, "Thank you for treating me like a person," and a check she never expected. The family? They got silence, but not emptiness. I left them what they earned, a legacy of learning. One I hoped they'd never forget. The will wasn't read in a fancy office. It was mailed, timed, sealed in envelopes that smelled faintly of lavender and old books. Some of the letters were tucked into safety deposit boxes. Others were slipped between pages in library copies of titles I once loved. The Color Purple, Their Eyes Were Watching God, A Man Called Ove. The letters didn't explain everything. They didn't need to. They weren't meant to justify. They were meant to witness. "You took my name off the deed," one read, "but you never learned how deeply it was etched in stone." Another, "You moved my chair. I moved my legacy. We're even now." But the one I left in the hands of the foundation, the first grant check to a woman who called from a shelter after her son took her pension, that one just said, "This is yours. You matter. Rest now." I never needed my name in lights. I just needed it whispered in relief by someone who no longer felt invisible. And that, finally, was enough. My last weeks were soft. Tea in the mornings, books in the afternoon. Birdsong through the window I chose for myself. I had no regrets. Only roots. I had become the thing they tried to erase. And still I grew. Not because of them. In spite of them. When I closed my eyes for the last time, I wasn't angry. I was satisfied. I had been seen not by the ones I raised, but by the women who rose because of what I left behind. They'll never know me by face, but they'll feel me when someone tells them, "You have options." They'll find my letters when they most need them. They'll read my words and know someone walked this road first and cleared a little of the brush so they wouldn't trip quite so hard. That's what legacy is. Not inheritance, but inheritance reimagined. They took the chair. I left the whole house, but only to those who knew its worth. And when the wind comes through that window, the one I kept open in every chapter, may it carry a voice that says gently, "You're not done. You're just beginning." Underscore, 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 underscore. Let me know if you'd like the full compiled version of this script as a downloadable document or video-ready draft. It's been an honor to help you tell her story.